Oi oi, it's your boy. Is he bold? There's no one braver. Is he sweet? Our favourite flavour, Jack Slack. Fights Gone By podcast, episode 161, coming at you on Friday, the 23rd of August. And it's a bit of a slow weekend. I mean, we'll touch on what's going on, but it's not really much going on. So today I thought we'd do a few more questions, talk about the news a bit more, and also just like go into maybe some interesting materials, you know, books, instructionals, things like that I enjoy as a martial artist or have developed some aspect of my personal philosophy or training philosophy from. So I put up the Q&A threads on Facebook and Twitter, and they're filling up as we speak, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's talk about some news. Just a spate of fight announcements this week. Some of them are really quite interesting. You've got Rory McDonald versus Lima, Douglas Lima 2. That's going on October 26th. We all knew that was happening. It's just nice to get that in the books. In fact, that really sort of slowed down because it was McDonald had to do one fight after the other within like 3 weeks of each other when he fought Fitch and then who was it? Naaman Gracie. And then it seemed like it sort of ground to a halt, and now we're doing that in October. But, you know, whatever gets that tournament squared away, we're all sort of hoping that Lima finally capitalizes on his potential. That first fight, you know, you watched it and you went, Lima could have won that if he just got to it sooner, if he'd gone a bit more aggressively after McDonald, because he had him badly hurt with the low kicks. But, you know, excited to see how that turns out. Elsewhere at welterweight, Matt Brown's coming back. He's announced that he's got a fight booked, and that's really more like a teaser because the word was that they were looking into having Matt Brown versus Dan Hardy. Dan Hardy's been making noise about coming back for a while. You know, none of these guys can stay away for long, and Hardy retired quite young, to be fair. And he's been doing a great job as a commentary and analysis man for the UFC. But I expect if you're still training and you're still healthy, that's gonna bug you a bit to want to get back in there. And he re-entered the USADA pool a little while ago. So whether this is Matt Brown versus Dan Hardy or not, it's being framed like it's teasing that. And frankly, you know, Matt Brown, good fight for Dan Hardy coming back, because Matt Brown is sort of on his way out the door now. You know, he's had a distinguished career, and he's a little bit more fragile than he used to be. You know, like all these fighters, when they age, they get a little bit easier to hurt. Not looking quite as sharp. Did just, you know, murder Diego Sanchez, but Diego Sanchez has been done for a long time. But, you know, Matt Brown, mainly a striker with some interesting clinch stuff. I mean, obviously great on the ground, but that's the sort of fighter you want Dan Hardy fighting, because Dan Hardy is a great left hook. You know, he's got other stuff, but mainly it's that great left hook. Elsewhere, we got the battle of the best grapplers in the UFC/MMA, Ben Askren and Damian Maia. They've both been framing it like that, but, you know, you're more than likely going to get a shitboxing match out of this one. However, it's kind of interesting because they booked it for this card in Singapore, which I believe is that the 12th of October, that one? Because the October 12th is when all the organizations are seemingly going head to head. You've got one doing their own event in Singapore. You've got the UFC doing this in Singapore. You've got Ryzen doing either Ryzen 19 or 20. They're about a day apart. I don't know why they're doing that in October rather than December, because they used to do like a December New Year's Eve, or like a December 29th thing and a New Year's Eve thing. But Ryzen are doing an event on that, and I think Bellator also have something going on. So it's it's one of those ones that you love as a fight fan, but you also kind of dread as someone who covers the fights and tries to watch everything that's going on each week. Because I try and watch, you know, there's a UFC event and a Bellator event on. I try and watch both. If there's one event on, I will normally try and watch that, even though they make it easy to access, but it can be hard given the time differences and just the sheer amount that goes into like a UFC or a Bellator event. Time-wise, that is. But, you know, you're talking about like 24 hours of fights there going head-to-head with each other, and there's no way I'm going to be able to watch those all by Monday. Elsewhere, you got Gerald Meerschaert versus Eric Anders signed for UFC Ultimate Fight Night 161. That's in Tampa. Like it, you got, you know, Meerschaert, very slick, savvy grappler. Eric Anders really at his best when he's stopping takedowns and moving forwards. Just murdered that guy the other week after getting a few brutal losses to people like Thiago Santos and that really rough one to Lumpini Khalil Roundtree Jr. I like that. I think that's got a chance of being really good. And in continuing like that sort of cool grapplers matchups, you've got Cub Swanson versus Crone Gracie booked. Is that for the same night? Yeah, Ultimate Fight Night 161. That's a really good test for Crone Gracie, because Cub Swanson, sort of on the way down, has these known vulnerabilities, but still good on the ground, good at getting up, and a fantastic banger. You know, if Crone Gracie gets too high on the smell of his own farts when he's boxing, because, you know, we've all been pleasantly surprised by not by the smell of Crone Gracie's farts, but by his boxing, at least. And, you know, you really don't want to take too many risks against a guy like Cub Swanson, who's going to crack you with a left hook or a weird overhand whenever you do anything, if you're not very clever, like, say, Shane Burgos or Max Holloway or someone like that. But, you know, a fantastic bump for Crone Gracie if he wins that one. In fact, yeah, I'd say that's probably better than... that's maybe better than Darren Elkins. And so, you know, you'd be leapfrogging Ryan Hall. And I think that, you know, at some point they're probably going to want to set up that Ryan Hall-Crone Gracie fight. But that looks like a lot of fun. And also you've got Gary Tonin buzzing around in one. If we could get him over to the UFC, that'd be fantastic. The three of them, you know, you have so many... interesting submissions and submission attempts going on in that division. It would really open up the eyes of many in the audience, because the thing that the UFC's always had trouble with is selling interesting submission artists. Jacare, even, you know, very exciting fighter, they really struggled to sell him. It seems like the knockout artist is the only thing that they can get to catch on, with the exception of, say, Ronda Rousey. But then again, all the focus became about how she was also knocking out world champions in the gym and stuff like that. And then the big Bellator news, they teased a huge international prospect signing, and then it was revealed to be James Haskell, who was, you know, a good rugby player for the England team. I was going to say the Britain team, the England team. Something like 77 appearances for them over 10 years, but a bit of a media personality in the UK too. Big guy, like 240, 250, and obviously athletic, and has been allegedly training, you know, grappling for years and years. But you know, it's Bellator. So, you know, even when they got someone like Jake Hager, where you're like, this guy has legitimate talent, it would be very exciting to see him move through the ranks and do something interesting. They're still going to find him the absolute worst opponents they can find him and just slowly put him through those. You know, they don't actually care about developing these guys to their potential. They care about putting asses in seats and having these guys pick up wins. And getting news coverage, because I was listening to, I think it was Radio 2 I was listening to the news on the other day. I was driving, I'm not like an old man who sits in his house listening to radio, but just on the end of the news they were like, and James Haskell has taken an interesting step in his career. He's becoming a cage fighter with Bellator MMA. So that's why Scott Coker does this stuff. He's basically Herschel Walker for the UK market. He's going to fight 2 nobodies, 3 nobodies, and then do nothing. But it will get asses in seats, and it will get to the front page of Reddit, I'm sure. So that's the point of that. And then Edmund Shabazian, who everyone loves, but also kind of hates because he's Edmund Targaryen, his only real prospect, and he's fighting Krzysztof Jotko, the 40-year-old Polish man who's not actually 40, at UFC 244. That's in New York in November. But, you know, Krzysztof Jotko, his last fight was hard to watch, not great. Oh, and Meatball Molly, Molly McCann, has signed a fight with Diana Belbita, the dieting biscuit, at UFC on ESPN 6. That's in Boston. Wish her all the luck in the world. She's great fun. And then Ali Akinta versus Dan Hooker has been officially booked. We've talked about that several times, I think, but finally been officially booked for UFC 243 in Melbourne, which I believe is Izzy versus Whittaker. So we got some fun stuff going on. Yeah, that's actually a really good week of signings, because like last week it was just Nunes versus GDR, and there was nothing else really on my radar. Let's have a little ramble about these fights this weekend. And again, like I said, there's really not a lot going on. There's not many, even as someone who's watched some Bellator, you know, and tries to cover it, I'm still struggling with some of these guys. Okay, so you got Matt Mitrione versus Sergey Haritonov in the main event. 2 heavyweights. Matt Mitrione, to be fair, both of them, guys who seem like they have all the potential in the world, but don't ever meet it. The first time they met, Matt Mitrione timed a kick as Haritonov was stepping in, kicked him in the groin, burst a hemorrhoid, or caused him to have hemorrhoids or something like that. A really bad kick, and it just couldn't continue after that. Sergey Haritonov, he's been the darling of MMA fans, alternate MMA fans forever. People have always been convinced that he's going to be big. I think he was a student of Volk Han back in the day, used to train with Fedor a lot. The whole thing was like, we want to see Fedor versus Sergey, but Sergey could never get the wins together. He had some like interesting performances, but again, like a lot of the things that people remember him for best are like the knockout of Ninja. Ninja who are middleweight, and I think he went down to welterweight by the end of his career. Sergey Haratonov, actual big heavyweight. He did knock out Roy Nelson in his last one, which was surprising, but then Roy has been just awful lately. And other than that, what's he done recently? This is where the heavyweight division is. He fought Geronimo dos Santos, and this is our watershed for us here on the Fights Gone By podcast. If you can beat Geronimo dos Santos, you are a world-class heavyweight. If you can't beat Geronimo dos Santos, you're a complete scrub. It's a pretty low bar to clear, and it was so low that Geronimo dos Santos got Sergey Haratonov's back and crossed his feet, and Haratonov footlocked him with the day one don't get caught like this footlock that is supposed to be impossible to get on competent guys. Before they fought Sokoju, just terrible list of shit here. Lost to Javier Ayala, which is the one we all remember him for, because he came to Bellator. That was his big debut, and Javier Ayala, whatever his name is, knocked him out in 16 seconds. Basically, all you need to know about Sergey Haratonov is he's got a great right hand, and various parts of his game just fall off in various fights. Sometimes he'll have no ground game. Other times he'll have no kickboxing, he won't be able to kick at all. And then other times he'll come back and he'll be like, oh, I've got a bit of grappling again, or I've got a bit of kickboxing again. He turned up in K1 and Glory. No, was it K1 or Glory? I can't remember. He turned up in one of those... it was Glory. Turned up in Glory to kickbox, and they were putting him in with guys like Daniel Gita, actual best heavyweight in the world at one point. And he didn't know how to check a kick, and Ray Safo's on commentary just being incredulous that this guy's in a kickboxing ring with great kickboxers and doesn't know how to check a kick. But he's got a big right hand, and that's really all that matters. So people long for him to do well. Matt Mitrione also has a big right hand, is a southpaw, fires good low kicks, beat Kimbo that way, and does a lot of lead right hook, lead right uppercut, things like that. Knocked out Derek Lewis back in the day. I've always thought that Matt Mitrione has potential in the same way that Haratonov has potential, in that, it's not just power. He is clearly aware of setting things up and finding the chin or where he wants to hit. He's clearly aware of timing low kicks and things like that. More Mitrione than Haratonov in that case. But, they've got a bit of smarts there, but they also don't seem to have enough to actually put it together. There's always these glaring holes in their game, and you're going, but you're clearly smart enough to do this. Why are you not smart enough to recognize that that's a problem for you consistently? Plus, Mitrione, he took that fight with Ryan Bader. Basically, Mitrione and Bader were the only legitimate heavyweights in the Bellator heavyweight tournament. They met in the first round, I think it was. Oh no, he met Roy Nelson in the first round, then he met Bader. But they met, and Bader just ragdolled him because he couldn't get up. He couldn't work his way up and get free, despite having this big size advantage and strength advantage. And, allegedly an athleticism advantage, because he was wasn't he trained by an NFL team or something like that? He's another one who's come from football. At any rate, we're hoping for a banger. We're just hoping Sergey doesn't get kicked in the dick again, and that they don't lean on each other too much. Then in the co-main, you got Vitaly Minakov versus Javier Ayala. Javier Ayala, I can never say his name, but Javi is the spoiler in Bellator. He's a homegrown talent, been with him since 2013. Actually beat a Thiago Santos in his debut, but it's not that Thiago Santos. It's Thiago Santos who then lost to Geronimo dos Santos, so he's an absolute scrub. But no, Javier Ayala, been there for ages, fought Eric Prindle and people back in the day. And then, really came to people's attention when he knocked out Sergey Haratonov back in 2016. Had a couple of losses to Czech Congo and Roy Nelson. Czech Congo on a streak at the moment for some reason. Probably because the competition is much worse, to be honest. But fought Frank Mir in his most recent one. That was back in December. And he just he knocked Mir's mouthpiece out along the fence. Mir always had trouble along the fence. He got dirty boxed by Big Nog, which tells you something. And Javier Ayala put him on the fence. knocked his mouthpiece out, smashed him in the mouth, and like detached his palate or something. It was pretty grim. Because Mir just tapped out, which is the smart thing to do. He was just like, fuck that. Meanwhile, Vitaly Minakov was the next Fedor. We were all super hype on him, and then basically got into a money dispute with Bellator because Bellator suddenly had all this money, but he was still on the same shitty contract that he was before. He's part of that ongoing story where none of Bellator's heavyweight champions have actually stayed with Bellator or been happy. It was Cole Conrad was the first, and he actually retired from MMA to sell like milk futures, because he wasn't making any money. And he was one of the really big questions because he was like Brock's size, but supposedly a much better wrestler. And he took to boxing really well. Even when Brock came back, I think that was the Mark Hunt camp, there was a picture of him and Cole Conrad training together that went up, and everyone lost their minds. But Cole Conrad literally, after the Bellator tournament, when before the final of the Bellator tournament, which was Fedor versus Ryan Bader, I was saying that Cole Conrad could come down to the ring in his slacks and just take the trophy from whoever won it, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. He was a bad man, and he was still very much up and coming. And then they just didn't pay him enough, so he's like, "Fuck this, I'm out." And then Minakov went on his spirit quest to Russia while the Bellator refused to pay him, and then Volkov came along, won the title, and left. So yeah, not really great history, that heavyweight title. But Minakov went off to Russia, fought a load of absolute scrubs in Fight Nights Global. Look, first one here I'm seeing is Geronimo dos Santos. And Peter Graham, why the fuck is he in MMA? And Bigfoot Silva was like the big name that they roped in to fight him, and he just smashed him. But he fought all these nobodies out in Russia, and it kind of, you do wonder with people like him and Nikita Krylov, does it hurt you? Do you get complacent by being out there fighting nobodies? Because he comes back, fights Chet Congo, who is better than a nobody. He's going to beat Geronimo dos Santos, and it just looked awful. I did a little post-fight piece on the Fight Primer of this fight, and if it's online, go watch it, because I think it is on the Bellator website. But yeah, go watch it. Because Minakov throws the right hand and he just can't move with his right hand. Every time he tries to step in on Chet Congo gets away, and he just can't keep up with him. And he doesn't have a jab, doesn't have anything else. He's just every time I will lead with the right hand. He basically took the next Fedor thing to heart, except where Fedor had a wickedly fast right hand lead that he could then move into the clinch of. Minakov's just throwing these overhands naked and doing nothing with them, and Congo just humiliated him. So yeah, this fight, anyone's bet, because I could see Javier Yala just knocking him out, because he's been wobbled before. He's not very defensively sound. He doesn't seem to have much urgency getting to the clinch or getting to the ground, and he's sloppy as fuck on the feet. Minakov, this is actually all of them, all four, main and co-main, all sloppy as fuck. And then you're into a women's fight between Alejandra Lara, coming off 2 losses, one in a title fight against Lima McFarlane, one against Juliana Vasquez, and she's fighting some lassies 4 and 5, and she's ranked on Tapology number 1,125th pound for pound in the US Northeast. So what the fuck is that doing on a televised card? And then Tyrell Fortune versus Rudy Shafroth, both these guys 6-0, both these guys took all their fights with Bellator. Barely anything I know about them. And then Dave Rickles versus Amosov. Amosov's good. Dave Rickles is, if you watched him against MVP, I mean, he's a crowd favourite, but and then you got Nick Newell on the card. So that's basically all that's going on. The rest of that. Oh, Ricky Banderas is on the card too, and he's good. Why is he in the prelims? Anyway. Oh, and Timothy Johnson. Fucking hell. Just night of terrible heavyweights. Yeah, so, that's why we're not... Well, that's why I expected not to talk much about that fight, that card this weekend. It's really not good. It's basically to keep me going. It's to keep us going with our fight addiction until something more interesting happens next week, which is the UFC China card, which again isn't very strong, but I got a Filthy Casuals guide coming up. I'm trying to do it more like it's going to have a little bit of a documentary element where we're talking about the history of MMA and the UFC in China. Unless it doesn't, unless I get too close to the deadline and I'm like, fuck, take that out. Or I'm worried about getting disappeared. But yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do. So if that sounds like a cup of tea, let me know. And if that sounds like, fuck no, just go back to just the tech. We're going to do the technique stuff too, but if you just want the technique stuff, let me know and I'll stop wasting my time on that. But yeah, that's what's going on this weekend. And next weekend, I suppose. Let's go to the questions threads. Okay, top question from Willie. This is criminal, and he's got the fighter purses via the California State Athletic Commission for the UFC 241 card. Daniel Cormier, 750k. Stipe Miocic, 500k. Given that Overeem gets that show money with no win bonus every time he fights, and he's not even, like, top 5 anymore, that's quite surprising. Nate Diaz, 250k. Fair enough, because he was on a very long Ultimate Fighter contract, came in with them, and he was on 20 and 20 for a long time. Anthony Pettis, 155. He renegotiated well, given that he literally can't win 2 fights back-to-back. Yoel Romero, 150 and 150 show and win. Paulo Costa, 60 and 60. How does that make sense? They didn't both win. No, Paulo Costa won. They would have got a fight of the night bonus. Well, the point is that Amir Khan made 7 million versus Billy Dib. Yeah, I mean, there's no way that Amir Khan's fights are being more viewed than UFC 241. I expect everyone else on that card with Amir Khan was paid much worse, but yes, the revenue split for the UFC is garbage. It's like 18 to 20% has been revealed recently. Could be lower now. That was like 2013 they were talking about in the Monopoly hearings. Yeah, it's a joke, but, you know, nothing's going to be done about it until they got a players' association, and they won't form a players' association because they're idiots. And also a lot of them, you know, are taught to absolutely dread unions, and other people have just been, you know, told that a union will ruin the sport. And part of it is calling it a union because Americans are terrified of that anyway. But, you know, the NBA, Major League Baseball, NFL, all have a players' association, and they all got the players paid better as a standard after they set that up, and the sports haven't disappeared or gone to shit since, you know, so the idea that, we can't, you know, the sport wouldn't survive it is just nonsense. If you're buying that, you know, you're an idiot. Or Sam Alvey. And those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Right, Paul says, you mentioned an obscure, brackets, to my eye, conditioning book, which is great. It makes me wonder if you favour any DVD instructionals over others. A favourite or small set of favourites for BJJ/striking, ? Yeah, I wanted to talk about some instructionals today, because I was watching, Lucian Carbin. He just released an instructional, and Lucian Carbin has always been like an interesting figure, but, you know, unless you're going to, is he in Amsterdam or somewhere else? Unless you're going somewhere in Holland, Netherlands rather, to train with him, you're not going to get, you're not going to learn a lot unless he comes to do a seminar with you. You know, there's not a lot of information out there, but you can watch interesting clips of him doing weird footwork drills and mitt drills with his fighters like Tyron Spong and people like that. Overeem, I think, went to train with him for a while. Basically, everyone in the Dutch kickboxing scene ends up training with Carbin for a while, and he's got a properly weird style. He's, you know, lots of stance switching, lots of big, wide swinging punches, because a lot of the time his fighters' feet are under them and not generating the power, and lots of hooks into knees and knees into hooks. So Andy Risti was like the prototypical Lucian Carbin fighter. It was always like enter with a kick or a knee, come down with a hook, and then throw another knee, or the other way around. And he was catching guys just going between stances, and, you know, he confused Giorgio Petrosian, Robin van Roosmalen, and tons of others, and he was Glory champion for a while. And then Lucian Carbin sort of disappeared from Glory, and there was all this sort of speculation, and I think came out, it was something to do with glove tampering before the Robin van Roosmalen fight. And from what I have heard, again, this could be inaccurate, but I think the glove tampering thing is the accepted reason that he doesn't have anyone competing in Glory anymore. I believe the reason was that he separated Risti's thumb from the majority of his glove. You know, the thing that has been put in recent years on boxing gloves and kickboxing gloves to stop people from thumbing the eye. I mean, obviously, if you cut your thumb free, you're also a bit more free to grab the wrists and things like that. But I think if you're not going to take that much risk of getting caught, you know, of actually committing a fairly serious foul just to grab the wrist, I think, you know, the plan might have been to have him thumb Van Roosmalen's eye. Anyway, point is, he just came out with an interesting instructional. It's actually really good. I'm having great fun drilling some of the stuff from it, like, you know, uppercut, hook, body kick, stance switch, uppercut, hook, body kick, and working stuff like that with your friends and pad men. Definitely fun. Maybe not like the best for fundamentals, but a fun one nonetheless. Another interesting set that I really like is Born to be Strongest, which is a full contact karate DVD or set of DVDs. And they've got some really interesting stuff on there. Nori Chaka, what's his name? I've written about him before, but he's a wizard with his kicks, and he's it always goes two ways in Kyokushin and things like that. You either learn to be a very slick kicker who can throw kicks from all over the place, like Andy Hug, or Noricheka, whatever his name is, or you learn to be like a stand in front of them and hit their body as hard as possible and kick their legs sort of brawler, and you don't, it gets to hurt you quite a lot when you go to kickboxing and you can't just stand in front of people trading. But Noricheka Thingy, whatever his name is, I'm so sorry, I'll look it up at some point, but I've written about him several times before, but he does lots of things like inside out kick, Gyaku Moshigeri or Uchi Moshigeri or whatever you want to call it. The one that Anderson Silva did to Michael Bisping, he was doing things like that. He'd throw that and then come up the middle with a flying knee, did amazing wheel kicks and things like that. And he had some really interesting theories about like where to place your weight over the lead leg or the rear leg and where your shoulders should be. And that's all on that DVD. But it's like a series of guest instructors, and they're all really accomplished competition people or competitive Kyokushin karateka. Or it might be Seido, can't remember which, but it's one of those ones. Really interesting stuff, and there's a Russian guy, I can't remember his name. Well, they got Valery Dimitrov, who shows the Valery kick, which is like a crescent axe kick to the thigh, which he's actually stopped people with. He just throws it in just under the hip, and their leg just gives out on them, which I think might be a good way to attack the leg in MMA, because it's another one that doesn't, it deals with the check too. If you kick someone with your heel into their shin or their knee, that's still going to hurt them probably as much as it hurts you, rather than the middle of your shin on the top of their shin or knee, which is going to fuck you up. There's a couple of other interesting ones in there, like lots of collarbone punching, because that's a Kyokushin thing, but I've tried to work that more into my kickboxing sparring, just because I like it. But yeah, Born to be Strongest, look that one up. What else do I like? Kenny Weldon's instructionals on boxing from back in the day were pretty good. I mean, again, all these styles are very different to each other, because Kenny Weldon teaches quite a side-on style of boxing, and he teaches to bounce in on the lead foot. He has like a plank of wood that he puts on the ground, which is like an inch higher than the ground, and he has his young lads bounce their lead foot onto it, and every time they bounce onto it, they throw the jab out. He calls it like the rack or something like that, but basically it's just learning to be in the bounce constantly and jabbing as you go onto your front foot. And he's got some really interesting stuff on, like, what does he call them? Something punches, but basically it's where you parry and you immediately return with the same hand and build combinations. He's got some really interesting stuff on ring cutting too, which is, we always talk about it, herding people into strikes. When the person moves to your left, you throw the left hook or the left low kick or the back kick or the wheel kick or something like that. Something that approaches them from that side and stops them. And if they move to your right, you throw the right body kick or the right head kick or your right hook or overhand or something like that. And Kenny Weldon did a ton of work on that, and put it into drills, which is really useful. Grappling wise, I mean, the best ones, Danaher's are, unless you are someone who makes their living by watching grappling and has to really keep up with the developments, or, if he's got something out that you are really interested in that specific aspect, I would skip a lot of Danaher's stuff, because it's 8 hours per series, per DVD series, and he's done dozens of them now. His Escapes one was decent, but I don't know if I learned anything more about Escapes, that I felt was worth all that time than I did from, Damien Meyer's stuff back in the day, or Ryan Hall's stuff. Ryan Hall's Defensive Guard is the one that I'm repeatedly coming back to now. I used to be all about, like, his deep half guard stuff and things like that. And the stuff that actually teaches the technique, and I'd be like, I don't really get this defensive guard stuff. Bit of a miss on this one, Ryan. But I've really been enjoying that one more. The better I've got at grappling, humbly, he says, the more grappling I have done, the more interested I am in the overall conceptual stuff. There's something to be said for DVDs that are just like a load of entries to things, and I think especially if you're dealing with one position, that's really important. Like one of my favorite books is, or on grappling at least, is Mastering the Triangle or Mastering Triangle Chokes by Neil Melanson, which is just like 100 entries, and some of them are definitely more low percentage than others. But that's the philosophy that Ryan Hall gives in his like triangle DVD and things like that. Work the mechanics out of the position, find as many ways as possible to get into the position, and that's the same thing Marcelo Garcia said about his X guard. If you've got a thing and you have a load of ways to get there, that's the best way to start learning things and start getting better. But the Danaher ones can be very hard work. So the Danaher ones that I would say are probably don't miss. The back control one, because his guys were just murdering in EBI, especially when the rules were, in the overtime section, start from the back. His guys were doing very, very well there. Tonnen, Ryan, and Cummings was with them at the time. And the leg attacks one, because everyone, that was the one that everyone was waiting on, and that was the first one to come out. And it was, admittedly, very useful and interesting, and now everyone plays that game, or at least knows how to play that game. Or works on playing that game, rather. I think I say Saulo Ribero's Jiu-Jitsu University every time. Again, really good fundamental stuff. Couple of underrated things. Dirty Boxing for MMA, Matt Linden's book. It came out to very little applause. I think it was one of the last ones that Victory Belt did before they just went into like diet stuff. But it's not really a dirty boxing book. It's got dirty boxing sections in, but really it's like an MMA wrestling book. And I think it's probably the best one out there. It's much better than Randy Couture's. It's by the same publisher, but it's really, really good. And it's just like tons of info on 2-on-1s and things like that you would never expect to see in an MMA book. So you're thinking, like, did they just decide at the end that not enough people wanted to read Wrestling with a Bit of MMA by Matt Linden, and they had to make it like, Dirty Boxing, The Secrets. Drill to Win by Andre Galvao is great too, but now, you can't find it for like under $800 probably. I really like all of Ray F. Carson's old books, but then, I'm a bibliophile, I just sort of collect stuff like this. It's probably not worth the price of admission or, of getting it. The conditioning book, in case anyone was wondering, the obscure conditioning book I mentioned the other week was Joel Jamison's, I think it's Ultimate MMA Conditioning, and that sounds hacky as shit. When I see Ultimate MMA anything, I'm like, ugh, Ultimate MMA workout, and it's just some guy in sprawl shorts swinging a sledgehammer or some shit like that. But no, it's actually one of the most approachable books on energy systems and things like that that you'll find. And the way that it's broken down is absolutely brilliant. It's helped me so much personally, because he breaks down things into 8-week cycles, which is a totally doable amount of time to do anything. You're not just going at it and you're going like, well, this is my life now. You're going, okay, well, I've got a 4-week mesocycle here and a 4-week mesocycle there. And at the end of that, I'll work out how much, my heart rate or my lactic acid or whatever has improved over that time. And then you're into the next 8-week cycle, which is a bit more focused on, say, strength or explosive power. And you could easily do a year of that without getting bored. And I really like that. And then you're back to, cycle 1 and you're going, oh, okay, cool. We're doing tons of conditioning again. And it's just all about the different energy systems and stuff. And he's worked with, Demetrius Johnson. Obviously, everyone knows Demetrius Johnson always comes in shape, but the other guys he's worked with, like Rich Franklin, Tim Boich. Tim Boich always looked a bit like a slob, but comes in shape. Rich Franklin always was known for being in shape. So, Joel Jamieson has had really good, results with his fighters, and that book is absolutely astounding. In fact, Joel, hit me up, because if you want to write another book or anything like that, I'm desperate to give you money. Cheers, Paul. Nicholas says, could you give your thoughts on fundamental differences between striking and grappling? What distinguishes a push from a strike, a foot sweep from a low kick? This is something that you could argue all day, normally with a referee. It's very close. I was watching, what was the one the other day? Oh, Connectic, the grappling event, and two of the guys were, it was Nick Rodriguez and some other guy who was also called Rodriguez, I think, but they were wrestling on the feet, and it just got into that slapping match again. It's exactly like Ricardo Arona versus whoever it was at ADCC, back in the day when they actually got into a full-on fight over it. The Schultz brothers, clubbing the head. You go for a collar tie. Oh no, it slipped off, but I also sort of bashed your noggin with my forearm. Guys do that. It's just what happens. And all I was always told was like, grip at the intensity that you're willing to be gripped back. Just if you go out there and spank someone in the head, expect to get spanked back. And if they spank you, spank them back. There's all sorts of things like that in grappling where you're like, that's a legal strike. Eddie Bravo is always talking about when you're freeing your foot. If you're knee cutting through someone's guard and they're just pinching onto your foot and they've got nothing else, they're just like, can't let him have the foot free. You can use your other leg to like back kick them in the thigh as hard as you like. Legal strike. And again, we're going back to Ryan Hall because, big influence on me, but he's always talking about grip breaking as palm striking the knuckles. If someone's got your sleeve, you move your hand to where you can see their knuckles, and then you palm strike the top of their knuckles and pull your hand away. You can smash the shit out of someone's hand legally and do that. There used to be one that, well, actually, guys are still gripping this way, but it used to be the fashion, like, if guys gripped the front of your pants in a De La Riva, De La Riva guard, if they grip the front of your pants when they're on the bottom, guys used to just drop their knee on the hand. And that's a really nasty competition one, which, you could just be like, well, I'm just breaking the grip, but you're also trying to break the other person's hand. But then it goes the other way, because, half of Floyd Mayweather's success was wrestling dudes, and people don't realize that. Even at the end of that fight, people were saying Conor McGregor shooting panic doubles and things, or trying to clinch. A guy who has been wrestling every day for however many years, trying to clinch with Floyd Mayweather, and Floyd Mayweather was still able to frame off him with a forearm and punch him. And those are Floyd's best punches. When guys move into clinch and he frames on them, he is so good at that. Badr Harry's amazing at that too. That push-pull, where you're framing off their head with your left arm and you throw your right hand at where your left hand was. You've got to pull your hand back and get the punch out without them dropping into the space. And he's really good at that. Badr Harry just murked dudes from that position. Laurie says, why don't we see Dutch hand traps in MMA? Dutch hand trap is a name that I gave ages ago. I'm not being like, I coined that term. No, I mean, it was just something I did to classify something. It's like because I think I'd already used cross hand trap and same side hand trap. So I was like, what do I call this thing that's kind of like a cross hand trap but isn't what I call a cross hand trap? Dutch hand trap is where the opponent puts their gloves up to cover up, in the kickboxing style. You trace your left hand over the top of their head to their left hand, you pull their left hand down, I just hit my microphone, whoops, and you crack them with the right hook. Nicky Holskin's great at it, Gokhan Saki was great at it, but again, you're not going to see Gokhan Saki do it in MMA much because guys don't go to that cover-up. It's the kickboxing meta, I think. It's just, you've got to have your hands on your head for it to even work. It's like the cross-hand trap, when you're pulling your opponent's lead hand with your lead hand and firing the right hand down the inside. That only works when their hands are away from their head. These hand traps are very sort of position specific. You've got to be able to look at your opponent and say, well, that's their guard, here's how I can attack it. You're not going to cross hand, inside hand trap someone like that if their hands are back in their guard, like tight to their head, earmuff style. And you're not going to, Dutch hand trap someone if their hands way out in front of them. Sam says, what do you think about organizations like Ryzen having titles as overall achievements rather than you defeated the last guy who had it awards? On the one hand, it's weird having a person lose it and keep their title. On the other, it's not the champion. It's not like the champion can defeat everyone below them. So why not have it as a recognition of a particularly good run rather than an undefeated streak? This is interesting because, I've always thought that's bullshit when you have Pride and Ryzen people doing that. In fact, this came up this week. I'm writing a thing about KJ Noons because I always liked him, and he was one that I held on to way too long, being like, he will reach his potential, or, he just has to do this, he just has to do that. And it was just like, I think at the start of the article, I said, well, ruining the article because it's going out for the Patreon boys, but I said, it was to the point where there were, so many holes in the boat that I'd be better off getting a new boat than just filling those holes in. But Noons was in an interesting position because he was selected by Pride back in 2005 when he had 2 fights, and he'd won a load of Sanshao championships and things like that in Hawaii, and he'd sent an audition tape, or Pride had looked him up, and Pride gave him the best striker award in their auditions or something like that, and were like, come fight for us, and he said no because he found out quite quickly that they wanted him to fight people like Gomi. Gomi was the best in the world, and KJ Noons had 2 MMA fights and a few boxing matches and kickboxing matches. And that was because what Pride liked to do, and they did this with Fedor, they did this with Wanderlei Silva, and, you'll see Dream did it too, I think, to an extent, and you're going to see Ryzen doing it too. They liked to have their names in action more than they liked to have the title defenses. So Fedor only had 3 title defenses, despite, having the title for ages and winning all these fights in between. Only 3 of them were official defenses, because, they decided they wanted a tournament or whatever, and the challenger has to be legitimate and this, that, and the other. And I think part of that is an understanding that, yes, if you keep fighting, you will lose, and maybe, distinguishing that from a real title challenge that someone's earned is better. Because, if say I'm going to use Demetrius Johnson, even though everyone thinks I hate Demetrius Johnson, but say Demetrius Johnson lost to, I don't know, by the end they were picking up people who, none of us ever thought Chris Carriasso was that good. None of us ever thought that John Moraga was that good. Or Ray Borg even. Actually Ray Borg, he did have that win over Formiga, so that's a bit fairer. But Wilson Hayes had just almost lost to Olga Sasaki when he got his title shot. But, if he'd lost to them, you'd been like, well, he has been fighting every X months, and, that constant thing of like, did he take them seriously? There's a difference between if Demetrius Johnson fought like a world heavyweight champion, and he fought once a year, and he took it super seriously, than if he was the guy just, stocking up the cards and fighting every 6 months, or every 4 months or whatever. Maybe differentiating them is important. What's just happened with Ryzen, I'm not sure on this, but if you didn't see it, Kyoji Horiguchi actually got caught by Kai Asakura very early in their fight and got knocked out. And Kyoji's been like the Iron Man of the last year and a bit of MMA. He's been fighting constantly, Ryzen and Bellator. And he's just beaten Darian Caldwell. He's very, very legit. Fought Kai Asakura, who's still sort of like, or was sort of untested. And Kai Asakura just turned up and knocked him out. And I thought that was an official defense, but now people are saying that he didn't win the belt, and I'm not sure about that. But like Gomi lost to Marcus Aurelio and didn't lose the belt, so they gave him a rematch where the belt was on the line, and Gomi actually showed up and performed. But I don't know. I think it's a very Japanese thing to allow just to get as many fights as possible out of the champion and to sort of like justify some of these softer fights. But again, it also sort of proves that even softer fights, if you fuck up against someone who's actually got some decent power in their hands or got some good submissions on the ground, it's still a fight. But again, like I don't like, Nate Diaz or Anthony Pettis taking one fight at welterweight, scoring a Superman punch, which, whether you think it's fluky or not, that was an out of nowhere knockout. And, then Anthony Pettis suddenly jumps up into like number 5 in the world welterweight. And then Nate Diaz comes back and fights Anthony Pettis, who hasn't won 2 fights in a row since 2015. And now he's number 5 welterweight or whatever. And you're going, well, no, Stephen Thompson actually beat a ton of guys at welterweight. That was why he was so highly regarded. He was really consistent. And suddenly now you've got these 2 super inconsistent guys who almost never fight. Well, though, Nate Diaz almost never fights. Anthony Pettis almost never wins. And suddenly they're in the top end of the division because one of them beats Wonder Boy in a fight once. So yeah, it's kind of weird. You'd rather see consistency rewarded. But who knows? 3 biggest fights you have no interest in watching, ? Jones versus DC 3, Khabib versus Conor 2, I presume, and Conor versus Nate 3. Oh, is he asking mine? I'm still interested by Jones versus DC3, especially if it's heavyweight, because as we've talked about before, Daniel Cormier put on 40 pounds and is suddenly stronger in the clinch. If Jones puts on some weight to meet Daniel Cormier in the clinch and fight off the takedowns and the uppercuts in the clinch and all that stuff that he did so well in the first fight and second fight to a degree, does he end up losing some of that longevity in the fight, because that's how he beat Cormier? He kept the pace up in the first fight and tied him out, and in the second fight he winded him with body kicks, caught him with a head kick. But certainly the second fight was a lot closer. But it makes you wonder, like, what can Jones do at heavyweight? Because it's not like the two are just fighting a couple pounds heavier. DC's actually made a bit of a transformation. He's packed on a ton of weight. So does Jones stay the same weight and try and fight light at that weight, or does he put on some weight? And how does that affect his endurance? When he was fighting Ovinson Prue, he was focusing on powerlifting the entire time and getting stronger and bigger, and then he just came in and didn't have, he just didn't look himself at all. But there's 1,000 reasons for that, so that's always interesting. Conor versus Khabib 2, part of me is like, Conor was doing some interesting stuff in that first one, and fighting off the body lock until like the 4th round. But again, I didn't think Conor should have been in the top of the lightweight division anyway, with like one win. Again, another guy who just jumped the queue, fought the champion. Suddenly we're all like, oh, I can't see anyone beating Conor. And you're like, he hasn't fought anyone in the top 10 or even 15 of the deepest, most difficult division on earth. How are you going to be like, oh, I just can't imagine him beating Conor? And then Conor versus Nate 3, fuck it, do it. I'd rather watch that than they talk about Nate versus Masvidal now. Maybe I'd watch that, yeah. Well, no, I would watch that, but I mean, like, maybe I'd watch that more than I would Conor versus Nate 3. Debo says, will wrestlers that can strike always hold the majority of the belts? I think it's always going to be easier to be a wrestler learning to strike than it will be being a striker learning to wrestle, because the clinch is something you fall into if you're striking regardless. And if you are comfortable clinching, if the clinch was your goal in the first place, by all means, strike away, because what's the worst that can happen? You miss and fall into them, and then you end up in a clinch. Whereas if you're a striker trying to wrestle, and again, coming back to the KJ Noons stuff, you always have to hold back. You always have to worry about stuff. And, you can deal with that many different ways, like, always have one hand low trying to feed an underhook, and then you're getting hit with punches that you wouldn't otherwise if you were just in a pure striking match, or you're having to, use your footwork and fight far more passively. So yeah, I think that's true. AB says, or AB 1986 says, Kotetsu Boku's career, ? He'll retire soon and deserves more attention by analysts such as yourself. Already a Patreon boy, and I'll send you 5 boxes of your favourite brand of Jaffa cakes. That would be off-brand. If you do a brief overview of the lesser-known Crazy B fighters, including No Face. Yeah, trained with Kotetsu Boku a little while back. Well, quite a while back, actually. But yeah, really cool guy. He sort of ran the competition team, or rather like the MMA team at Crazy B when I dropped in there. And yeah, just a cool guy. His striking was always really crisp and clever, but he always had that weird thing where he'd be better than someone on the feet and you could see it, but it wouldn't hold up. And again, coming back to KJ Noons here, but the one I'm really thinking of is like Joachim Hansen. They fought in the opening round of the Dream Lightweight Grand Prix, which I keep promising to do a history episode on, but they fought in the opening round of the Dream Grand Prix, and Boku was lighting him up, and then he'd land his 4 punches, and Joachim Hansen would just eat it on the chin and throw one back and knock him down. And you're like, well, at what point, does technique just not matter? Because you're doing everything right, and you're still getting beaten up by this guy who's just eating all your punches. But if you've not seen Boku's career, he's a very interesting fighter out of Japan, very crisp boxer. I don't know if he started in boxing, but he really got his hands on point. Kind of like Misaki. Misaki is the one I always think of for grapplers turned strikers. He really got his striking on point, but we could talk about Kazuma Misaki for a full episode. And I'm sure the Grabaka Hitman composer would love that, but we will at some point. I keep saying I'm going to write something about Paul Daly versus Misaki, because that was just one of my favourite fights. Francis says, what's the deal with Gordon Ryan and Lachlan Giles beating everyone at Quintet and Connectic? Do they have their superior style, or they train more, or are they just both real good, or all of the above? Part of that, Gordon Ryan is very, very good, and Lachlan Giles is very, very good. People forget that Lachlan Giles is very, very good, but when you watch Lachlan Giles run the table at Connectic, he was fighting Chris Lytle's team of guys who were MMA fighters in 2004. If you put Joe Riggs, who were they? It was Joe Riggs, Rico Rodriguez, looking just dreadful at his age, Chris Lytle, and a couple of others, in against guys who actually are world-class professional grapplers. That's what's going to happen. And these guys, the entire BJJ Fanatics team, all of them are maybe not Namji, or maybe not Rodriguez, but all of them, I believe, are getting ready for the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, which is, once every 2 years. It's the biggest competition on earth for submission grappling. Again, it shuts down my entire weekend every time it happens, and it's going on in September, so they're all in camp for it. And that's just why they run through it. Gordon Ryan, in fairness, at Quintet was a little bit different because, he was just on. He was looking awesome, but he was against good grapplers like the Souzas, Satoshi and who's the other one? I forget. But and Craig Jones was on the other team for that one when he was running the board. Again, part of that is weight difference too. Gordon Ryan is a lot bigger than Satoshi and a couple of the other guys that he was grappling against there. But when you watch MMA fighters grappling against actual professional grapplers, there's probably almost always going to be a big skill difference there. The ones that surprise you are people like Jake Shields, but again, Jake Shields got his way in MMA by being a really good grappler. He didn't really have a lot of other skills, except that time when he kickboxed up Tyron Woodley. Red Dirt Mike says, have you read Non-Compromised Pendulum about Customato's training method? Looks as likely to be total quackery as legit. I looked this up. You can actually find it online for free. Well, I'm assuming it's free. It was the name of the website was Non-Compromised Pendulum, and it was just there as a PDF. I was like, I don't feel like I'm stealing this. I didn't have to go through a lot of steps, but I started reading it. It seemed mostly to be like feel-good talk about Customato's personality and like trying to put that into mathematic theories, like own input plus input of others plus. I've just seen one of the Koch brothers have died. That's good. But yeah, only a little bit of it is actually about the technique. A lot of it seems to be like the usual quackery that you read about Cuss anyway. Cuss was very interesting, but he was also considered, just a bit of a nutter. And, Svengali returns was the was the line that they used when he came back with Buster Mathis trying to replace Floyd Patterson. But yeah, I'm looking at it. It looks interesting. I will definitely read it all the way through. I can't promise you it's going to be amazing, but one of these guys is supposed to be one of Cuss's students. Cuss had tons of students who weren't Mike Tyson or Floyd Patterson. They just didn't do anywhere as close to good as good as Patterson, Tyson, and Torres. But yeah, go look that up, everyone. Non-Compromised Pendulum. What a great name for a book. Proper weird. I did like one thing I read in it that was like, it said, imagine a box from your opponent's two shoulders going straight forward and never throw an uppercut from inside that box. Which, if you think about like Tyson's lever, the right hook to the right uppercut where he got his head offline to the right, or the thing where he shifted off into a southpaw stance on the left of his opponent and threw an uppercut through the middle. He did do that. He moved offline before he uppercutted, almost always. Daniel says, bit of a boring one, but what form do most of your useful sources take for your history episodes? Bit niche, but don't ask, don't get. Mainly, I just find as many books as I can on whoever or whatever I'm going to write about. Amazon Used is amazing because you can get things for like 2 pence. I think I got most of the Best Karate series, an old series of books by Nakayama. I think I got most of those for like under £1. If something's been printed a good amount and it's old, you can probably find it very, very cheap. And then newspapers, you can find an awful lot of newspapers online. I did tons of, particularly for things like, people's reactions to Jack Johnson and the general tone that people were writing about him at the time. Newspapers are very useful for that. And you can find those everywhere. There's like, I can't remember the names of them now, but there's some very good newspaper archives from the US that you have to pay for. So they're good too. Best strength and conditioning resources. Starting strength or strong lifts or something if you don't do any lifting. And then after that, move into more interesting stuff. I'm a big fan of Brian Alshrew, who is a strongman competitor, but he really does well with, like Eddie Hall used to complain that he didn't like doing too many dynamic events. He was like, I don't like moving. I like lifting big weights. If everything was the deadlift or some equivalent, Eddie Hall would always win. But, they like to have events where you're moving and you're lifting atlas stones and running between them and things like that, or gauntlets or so on, or fireman's carries. And Brian Alshrew, his static lifts aren't as good as some of the competitors in his divisions, but he's been very good at building people's work capacity, and he does tons of stuff, dynamic, moving stuff. And the way that he sets up his, protocols, what they're called, but the way that he sets up his stuff is always in giant sets, and I really like those because, it's very easy to just get bored or sit there on your phone and waste time in the gym, and I really don't like doing that. So the giant sets is a great thing, and that's where you take antagonistic muscle movement, basically the opposite of whatever your big mover is. So if you're going to do bench, you do some rows, whether that's barbell row or dumbbell row or kettlebell row or rowing with anything, basically. I like to take a big dumbbell, do rows on each side because I can just throw it down by the bench and have the bench already set up. It's a little bit trickier if you want to do barbell row and you have to set up 2 barbells. But so you do your rows, your bench, and then you do some ab variation, and then you do a conditioning variation like burpees or something like that. And it's just a really good way to make it absolutely suck, but also surprise yourself with like being able to put up very similar numbers, or, once you get good at it, even like the same numbers as you would if you were fresh when you did the bench press each time. And you have less, you cut down your rest breaks in between too. You keep them quite short. So yeah, he's great to look up, Brian Alshrew. Going back to George Amerson, he's got some interesting stuff on like strength for MMA. He really, because his focus is so much on aerobic, on the aerobic system rather than the anaerobic system, because everyone treats MMA as an anaerobic sport. But he says, like, you want as much as possible being done by the aerobic system, which is also in action at the same time that your anaerobic system is, even when you're using your anaerobic system. So yeah, a lot of his stuff is like learning to use or training your fast twitch muscles under an aerobic workload. So you're doing high intensity resistance intervals and things like that. And the tempo method, which is like very slow compound exercises, 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up, breathing constantly, which is a little bit different to doing like a maximal load, because again, a lot of the times you do like a maximal load, you're going to hold your breath, brace down on the air in your stomach and stuff like that. Again, not really my wheelhouse. It's just something I do, so that I can be better at the things I enjoy. But yeah, there's tons of interesting stuff out there. And a lot of it is available for free, which is fantastic. I was reading some old Pavel stuff the other day. And do you remember, like, in the early 2000s when everyone was convinced that he actually trained the Spetsnaz? And he always had, like, Master of Sport on the front of his things before everyone realized that you actually have to have a Master of Sport in something, and that they also don't actually mean that much either. But yeah, I mean, Pavel did write some cool stuff back in the day. Justin says, will we get that Filthy Casuals guide to karate boxers when Whittaker versus Adesanya comes up? Oh, I want to do it at some point, but I'm really looking forward to that fight. I can't stop focusing on this China Weili Zhang thing I'm doing at the moment, because it's coming out quite interesting. But Whittaker, I love him. He's my boy. And Israel Adesanya, actually my boy, friend of the podcast. We occasionally tweet each other. Where you could kind of say we're best friends, but yeah, it's going to be heartbreaking that one of them loses that fight. I can't decide if it would be more heartbreaking if one of them gets knocked out, or if it would be more heartbreaking watching Whittaker go to another life and death fight of the year or fight of the decade contender, just knowing how much he gets beat up in these fights, and also in his camps, because he's almost always injured. I can't wait for that fight. Anyway, God, we're rocketing through time here today, so I'll probably call it there for today, and we'll do some more, I don't know, maybe Monday. If you want to get in on the Patreon, read that new KJ Noons article about how wrong I was, and all the other stuff we do for the Patreon boys. Sign up to Patreon. It allows me to do this podcast twice a week. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Bellator's ball-busting big boys bless.